Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, the Auckland bus bust up. There's more commuter disruptions on the timetable for the morning rush. After pay negotiations stall, we will have the latest. Axe U-turn on the age of youth justice. Party leader David Seymour live on his big mistake. It's the great refixing that's actually busting budgets. We spell out how much mortgage interest rates have gone up in real cash monies. Touchdown for two more footy teams. Players from Zambia and the Philippines are welcomed by dozens of fans. And when coffee and teas come together, the environmental revolution brewing on the golf course. You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The government is being urged to consider changing the law to ban or restrict the use of dawn raids against overstayers. A review led by senior lawyer Mike Heron KC was launched earlier this year after a Pacifica man was arrested at his South Auckland home in the early morning. Here's our deputy political editor, Craig McCulloch.
2 years ago, the then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern apologised for the 1970s dawn raids. Today's review calls that apology hollow, given immigration officials continued to ambush overstayers in the early hours of the morning. It says ministry officials should set out clear guidelines to ensure such practices are a last resort only. That work is now underway, and all visits outside normal hours have ceased until it is complete. The review also asks MPs to consider putting their expectations in law.
The step in the Whakaari White Island trial has taken place at the Auckland District Court this afternoon, led by a karakia. 22 people lost their lives 4 years ago when the volcano erupted. 6 defendants, including the island's owners, face health and safety charges this week, laid by WorkSafe. During the hearing, Judge Evangelist Thomas asked the public to respect the court process.
I ask everyone to please to be patient about that process. It is part and parcel of any trial. It is designed to ensure that we are able to get the admin and logistical side of things done efficiently and quickly, and in a way which allows the trial to be presented fairly.
Several companies have already pleaded guilty to various charges. Auckland commuters can expect further travel disruption this week, with more industrial action planned by bus drivers pushing for higher pay. Hundreds of buses were cancelled this morning. Union representatives, Auckland Transport and NZ Bus and union representatives failed to reach an agreement at mediation today. First union organiser Hayley Courtney says the industrial action will continue until all parties can agree on new pay rates. The police are searching for a patched gang member after a kidnapping in Auckland. They say a woman was taken from a house in the North Shore suburb of Birkenhead a month ago to a property in West Auckland where she was assaulted. She was then taken to Northland, where Detective Senior Sergeant Nick Poland says she escaped from a vehicle in Whangarei and got help from a nearby ambulance. He says the police want to find patched nomad gang member Carlos Harris, who also goes by the name Silos Does It. He has distinctive tattoos on his head and cheeks, and the police say he shouldn't be approached. The European Union's ambassador to New Zealand expects the Prime Minister's trip to Europe will help him to understand what it's like to be close to the front line of the war in Ukraine. Chris Hipkins is in Sweden before travelling to Lithuania for the NATO Leaders Summit. Nina Obermeier says the military alliances meeting will be important.
Of course, an excellent opportunity for Prime Minister Hipkins to visit and to absorb what it means to be at almost the front line of the war. He'll have the possibility to connect with a host of European leaders, and he will be able to witness firsthand how the EU, because the European leaders are there as well, and NATO cooperate.
NATO's meeting comes as Ukraine marks 500 days since Russian troops invaded. The warm welcome for Zambia's women's football team arriving in New Zealand today has been overshadowed by allegations against its coach. Britain's Guardian newspaper has revealed that the Football Association of Zambia has referred an investigation into sexual abuse involving the team's head coach, Bruce Mwapwe, to FIFA. However, dozens of supporters were at Auckland Airport to greet the team. Auckland-based Tina Bonsumaro says football makes her people smile.
We like to dance, we love music, our people, it's more than, I like football, it brings our people together, but it's like literally in our DNA.
FIFA has been approached for comment on the allegations against the coach. In other sport, the football Ferns have one last chance to end their 10-game winless streak ahead of their World Cup opener when they play Vietnam in Napier tonight. The bulk of the squad have spent weeks on the training pitch together, playing internal matches and against male sides. Coach Jitka Klimkova says tonight's game will help her finalise her starting lineup before the tournament opener against Norway next week. And co-captain Ali Riley says they're still working on their combinations as tonight's starting 11 have never played an international together.
This is really important. I think it could be tactically similar to the Philippines. It's something to get momentum. It's something to get those last pieces, that cohesion together. And I think, again, just a way to show our connection to the crowd.
Meanwhile, world champions USA have beaten Wales 2-0 in their final tune-up match before the tournament. The White Ferns have snared 3 quick wickets in the second T20 cricket match against Sri Lanka in Colombo. Sri Lanka are at 14 for 3 in the 4th over. New Zealand won the first game of the best-of-3 series. And New Zealand's Lydia Ko has finished well off the pace at the 3rd women's golf major of the year, the US Open at Pebble Beach in California. Ko shot a final round 3 over par 75 to finish at 8 over for the tournament, 17 shots behind the winner, American Alison Corpus. That's the news.
A tragic crash in Hamilton.
It was a severe impact, and we're grateful that anyone walked away from that alive.
An EU deal signed.
They have the potential to increase their market share in the EU. Did we get everything that we wanted? No, of course we didn't. But actually, overall, it's a very good deal for New Zealand.
And an Ashes victory.
All momentum was going with England. Extraordinary atmosphere, and this incredible series has delivered again.
Keeping score, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. In the west, from Northland to Kapiti, also Coromandel Peninsula, Taihape and Taumarunui. Showers, especially north of Taranaki, possibly heavy. Thunderstorms possible in Northland this afternoon. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, clearing tonight. Otherwise, mainly fine with isolated showers tomorrow. Wellington and Waded Upper, cloudy with scattered rain clearing Wellington tomorrow morning and Waded Upper tomorrow evening. Fine weather for Nelson. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, also Stewart Island, mostly cloudy with scattered showers. Rain developing in Fiordland from late tomorrow afternoon with possible thunderstorms. Rain spreading to southwestland in the evening. Marlborough, Canterbury, Southland and Otago. Occasional drizzle about Banks Peninsula, otherwise fine spells. Scattered rain for Otago and Southland tomorrow evening. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with showers. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. More Auckland commuter disruptions on the timetable for tomorrow and the next day and the next. It comes after hundreds of bus drivers in Auckland Transport failed to agree on a pay deal during talks today. Up to 700 trips operated by New Zealand Bus were affected by strikes between 4 and 8 a.m, and it will be the same again tomorrow. Our reporter Jordan Dunn caught up with some disrupted commuters today.
Got to sat at a bus station, it was just like, where's the bus? And it just, no one even said anything, like there's nothing on the report that this bus strike was happening. And I just had to wait, and I just sort of waited, and I got sick of waiting, so I tried to catch another one, and the same thing happened.
I usually take buses from Pukekohe to Papagura. From there, I take usually train. So yesterday I got the news about that buses are on strike. So that's why I didn't take a chance. So I drove by car this morning. Would have taken a bus, which is a lot cheaper for me.
I've kind of like found less buses as normal, because normally I don't wait that much on the bus station, but today was a bit more waiting time.
Right, and there were less stops. Do you think less people were taking the bus at the stops?
Yeah, correct.
Were you aware that there was a strike?
I didn't know that. When I came out to office, I just heard the news, so then I found out that there was something ongoing.
And the drivers want AT to speed up on delivering a pay rate of $30 an hour, the same rate as drivers in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin are already getting. Public Transport Union President Gary Froggatt joins us now. Hi Gary, how are the talks going?
Hello Lisa. They're not. NZ Bus said that they're not prepared to negotiate any further, so we adjourned the mediation today.
So what is the sticking point?
Well, it's the drivers want to get to $30, as you said, the same as in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin.
And they're simply not prepared to give it to you?
No, Auckland Transport pay the company quarterly adjustment index payments to cover labour and fuel. The current base rate is $26.76. The company is offering to increase that rate to $28, but is not prepared to backdate it to the expiry of the current agreement, which is the 31st of March. So to help the company along, it was suggested that the drivers would accept to be paid small quarterly increases as per the increases they get from AT, to see if we could get to the $30 in 2024. But the company said no.
Because the discrepancy there is that Auckland Transport, speaking this morning, said that they are expecting pay rates of $30 an hour to be delivered to drivers by the end of the year. So where's the disconnect?
Well, we were promised $30 and it hasn't arrived, and so the drivers are wondering where the hell it is.
How much disruption is the strike action causing right now?
Probably too much. Wish we didn't have to do it, but those were my instructions, and that's what's been happening.
How long are you prepared to go for in terms of that?
Well, the current 1 hour strike each day is going through till Thursday this week.
Okay, so the kids are off school at the moment, right? If you haven't got this settled by when they come back, what will you do?
Well, we've no intention of disrupting the school buses, and so they will continue. We don't think it's a good idea to have kids wandering around the streets unsupervised, so we'll try and make arrangements to make sure that the school buses do run.
But commuter buses, the strikes could continue on into next week if you don't have a deal?
That's my instructions, yes.
Okay. So if Auckland Transport, if I can just go back to the pay rate, because if Auckland Transport says that $30 an hour is going to happen by the end of the year and New Zealand Bus says no, where is the money going that Auckland Transport is paying that they think is coming to you by the end of the year?
Right. Their Auckland NZ Bus is storing up that money, as they usually do each year, and then want to argue with us at the end of the year about why we shouldn't get it.
So back into talks when?
Well, we're going to meet on Wednesday to see if the delegates want to go into what we call facilitation. It's another process following on from mediation.
Appreciate your time, Gary. That's Gary Froggatt, who's from the Public Transport Union President. So more commuter disruption in Auckland on the bus routes tomorrow. It is 12 after 5. Kia mau tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Families of those who lost their lives in the deadly Whakaari eruption were among those acknowledged at a mihi whakatau today to herald the start of a trial over health and safety failings leading up to the disaster. The legal proceedings are the result of WorkSafe's most extensive and complex investigation. It's been 3.5 years since the disaster, which claimed 22 lives and left 25 seriously injured. The judge-alone trial is due to start tomorrow. Amy Williams has been at court.
A packed public gallery stood for the opening waiata. wirohea ki papātua nuku wirohea ki tai. E tuhi mare kura ki te ao tūroa.
The first to speak, Ngāti Whātua's Reverend Otini Rewhiti, acknowledged the families there and their loved ones that passed away.
Whakarongo ki te huia e tangi mai nā hui.
A difficult day for many, bringing back the horror of the disaster that gripped a nation in December 2019.
We begin tonight in the Bay of Plenty, where a massive rescue operation is underway following an eruption on White Island at around 2:11 this afternoon. That sent a plume of ash and steam 12,000 feet into the air.
There were 2 explosions, one after the other in quick succession.
Police say no survivors are expected to be found on Whakaari White Island after yesterday's volcanic eruption.
The trial starts this week, but since WorkSafe first laid charges against 13 parties in 2020, 6 organisations have pleaded guilty and another had a charge dismissed. Whakaari's owners, 3 members of the Buttle family, are now the main defendants facing trial over health and safety failings in the lead up to the tragedy, alongside 2 companies that booked and marketed tours to cruise ship passengers. Today, families of victims and defendants filled the public gallery in Auckland. Among those watching the live stream in a virtual courtroom set up at a conference centre in Whakatane was Judy Turner, who was mayor of the town at the time of the eruption.
The interesting one will be for those who have pleaded not guilty to the charges, and so how that plays itself out, what the implications are for those people, and if those things had been in place, would it have made a difference on the day, I think is what people are wondering.
Like each hearing in court so far, the trial days will begin with an acknowledgement of lives lost. Judge Evangelos Thomas will be presiding.
It is appropriate, as we always do, to pause and acknowledge, to remember and honour those who perished, to acknowledge and think of those who suffered so greatly, those who continue to suffer so greatly.
The trial starts tomorrow, with WorkSafe giving its opening address. The charges do not relate to the rescue and recovery efforts after the eruption.
It is 16 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Act's about turn on the youth justice age has been described as cynical, a backward step and exploiting fear. The party wants 17-year-old offenders put back into the adult court system, reversing a policy championed by the last National-led government and legislation Act supported under its confidence and supply agreement. Currently, 17-year-olds who commit serious offences like murder and sexual assaults can still be dealt with by the adult court. Still, ACT believes dropping the age was a mistake, and party leader David Seymour joins us now. Kia ora, David.
G'day, Lisa. Good to see you've wasted no time nailing your colours to the mast there.
Can you respond to the criticism first?
Yeah, absolutely. We were told that if the age was dropped, that if 17-year-olds were effectively taken out of the adult justice system, then 2 things would happen. One is the worst offenders would still go before the courts. Only 8% do, and we've seen instances where, for example, a person was beaten to within an inch of their life in their own home, a 78-year-old man, no less, with bones sticking out of his shins. That went through the youth justice system despite the protestations of police prosecution. The second thing we were told was that if only people were treated a bit more kindly and constructively, there would be less crime. Well, neither of those things have occurred. I think it's time to accept it was a mistake and have the courage to change it. And instead of effectively giving young offenders an extra year of free hits on victims, say if you're 17 and you commit a crime, you will be dealt with by the adult justice system.
Nobody is denying cases like the one that you have detailed are horrendous. They are. But if you look at the big picture, and I'm looking at a youth justice report, April 2023, it says over the last decade, offending by children and young people has decreased substantially. The rate of youth court appearances decreased by 65%. Reoffending of 16-year-olds within 3 years of a youth court appearance decreased from 71% to 65%. The evidence supports your earlier decision, does it not?
Well, no, it doesn't, for a couple of reasons. One is a decline that started in 2012 can hardly be attributed to a decision and change made in 2016 and implemented in 2019. Second of all, the data you're citing from that report is a question of how many times do police proceed against youth offenders. It's not a question of what is the victimisation. The Ministry of Justice actually goes around surveying random members of the public on how many times you've been victimised. What we see there is that people are being victimised more frequently and they are reporting crime less often. So I'm not surprised that you have those figures in front of you, but I'm interested not in the offenders. You see, the problem with this original change taking 17-year-olds out of the adult justice system was that for too long every crime and punishment initiative has been focused on the offenders. From the victim's point of view, things have got worse under that approach, and that's why we say it's time for more consequences for youth offenders, more personal responsibility, and more rights and safety for people following the law.
Don't you have to focus on the offenders to a certain extent because you do not want them to re-offend? And what we know is that the highest rates of re-imprisonment are among those who go to jail before the age of 20. And the recidivism rates are highest for property crimes and robbery for people who are jailed at those young ages. So it's actually, well, it would go against what you want to achieve, which is not to have 17-year-olds committing more and more crimes.
Well, a couple of points there, Lisa. First of all, ACT is the party that has mandatory rehab and early release if you learn to read, get a driver's licence and upskill yourself with a trade. But we also just make the observation that in order to do that kind of rehabilitation, you actually have to be detained in some way. At the moment, we are faced with a false choice that either we continue this approach of effectively tag and release, no secure facilities, get up on the roof, be given KFC, keep on offending, no worries. Or we say actually it is possible to build secure facilities that are rehabilitative and also give some cause and effect thinking, some action and consequence to youth crime. That is what ACT is proposing. It is a different approach from the last decade or so, but it's also a different approach from what I'm hearing about every time I visit a dairy or a jewellery store or anybody else who has been a victim of a crime. It is absolutely harrowing, and it is time for the values of New Zealand to reflect right and wrong crime and punishment so that people actually feel like they're safe in their own country, which they don't right now, I'm sorry to say. And that comes from the victimisation, not the police action.
We're out of time, but thank you for joining us. That is David Seymour, ACT Party leader. 21 after 5. Really interested in your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text. Let us know whether you agree with David Seymour and putting 17-year-olds back into the adult justice system or not, and why. 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Always interested in your feedback, homai or whakaaro. The text again, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko Iwi anō tēnei.
A review says the government should make it clear that dawn raids to arrest overstayers should be a last resort only. The review, led by a senior lawyer, was launched after a Pacifica man was arrested at his South Auckland home in April. Bus users in Auckland can expect further travel disruption this week as bus drivers call for higher pay. Their unions failed to reach agreement today in mediation talks with Auckland Transport and NZ Bus. The first hearing into the Whakaari White Island trial has taken place at the Auckland District Court this afternoon, led by a karakia. 22 people lost their lives 4 years ago when the volcano erupted. 6 defendants, including the island's owners, face charges laid by WorkSafe. And Chinese police have arrested a 25-year-old man after 6 people were killed and 1 injured in a knife attack at a kindergarten in the Guangdong province. The victims include 3 children, 1 teacher and 2 parents. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, it appears that everything is running pretty smoothly in all of the main centres around the country. I will have more traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The Prime Minister Chris Hipkins is in Sweden for a quick fire visit overnight before travelling on to Lithuania for a critical meeting of NATO leaders. The NATO summit, which New Zealand is attending as a partner country, comes as Ukraine marks 500 days since Russian troops invaded. Our political editor Jane Patterson is in Stockholm and joins us now. Kia ora, Jane. What is Chris Hipkins doing in Sweden?
Kia Kia ora, Lisa. It's a very short trip, just overnight and then off to Lithuania at the end of the day. But basically this is an acknowledgement of Sweden's support for New Zealand to get that free trade deal with the EU over the line. And that was when Sweden held the presidency of the EU Council and were very supportive and very helpful. So there are a few tourism promo sort of type events today. There'll be a fika, a traditional Swedish coffee catch-up for the Prime Minister to meet with some local businesses, and then a showcase of New Zealand food and beverage. Of course, all about getting that export trade and that promotion up. And then, but the other interesting thing about Sweden, of course, is it's one country that is very, very eager to join NATO to protect itself against increasing Russian aggression in the region. So that'll be something that is discussed at NATO. There is opposition at the moment from Turkey in particular and Hungary. So I'm not sure if that'll be something that Chris Hipkins talks to the Prime Minister today. New Zealand can't do a lot about that being a non-member state of NATO, but that's another interesting point of being up here today.
And is there any chance that he will meet President Biden or Zelensky during this NATO meeting?
So at NATO, there are a range of sort of set what they call bilaterals, and President Biden and President Zelensky are not yet on the schedule. He does have meetings with the likes of President Macron from France penciled in and the Prime Minister of Lithuania, but these things can be pretty fluid. Actually, he was due to meet the Dutch President, but in the intervening days, the government has collapsed and that Prime Minister has resigned, so you can see how things get quite fluid. And there are different types of meetings at these sort of summits. The formal bilats, but then there are things called a policide, and they're much more informal and I suppose spontaneous, but they still have to be planned. So he's hoping that he will meet President Biden in that sort of scenario. He said that nothing is locked down, but of course a lot of people want to speak to President Biden, but he does sound more confident about being able to have a catch-up with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, for both of those leaders, he has said that if he does meet with them, the use of cluster bombs, the United States, of course, supplying Ukraine with cluster bombs, he'll be relaying New Zealand's opposition to the use and the US offer to both President Biden and President Zelensky if he does have the chance to talk to them.
Thanks for the update, Jane. That is Jane Patterson, RNZ's political editor there. The All Blacks face a nervous wait to see if SANZAAR will take any disciplinary action over skipper Sam Cane, taking out a pitch invader after the side's win over Argentina in Mendoza on Sunday morning. The All Blacks are due to arrive in Auckland shortly and play South Africa at Mount Smart Stadium on Saturday. SANZAAR is looking at the incident to see whether Cane's actions constitute bringing the game into disrepute. To discuss this, we are joined by sports editor Stephen Hewson. Okay, Stephen, could it prove pretty costly for Sam Cane?
Well, I suppose first off, you might have thought that there were one or two other All Blacks that might be the one that take out or take matters into their own hands of a spectator that ran onto the pitch rather than Sam Cane. But on social media, Sam Cane has said that he is deeply disappointed by the actions that he took. He's apologised. That it was an error of judgment, and he's apparently managed to track down the pitch invader and caught up with him, and he says they had a good catch-up and that they left things in a good place. But it does raise the question, I suppose, of player safety. I mean, this wasn't the only fan that came onto that pitch after that Mendoza game. There were a dozen or so spectators that came on and were running around. I mean, who's to say any one of those people could have had some malicious intent toward the players? You know, they were running towards them. The players don't know what's, on anyone's particular mind. And certainly players have been attacked by fans as they leave the field post-match. I'm sure many people may even feel that, well, that was they brought the actions on themselves, and that dealing with them by or being dealt with by the players are only getting what they deserve. So, that may not help the All Blacks as we await word from SANZAAR as to what action if they'll take. And I heard from SANZAAR just a short time ago before we came on air that they're still awaiting the match report from their official there to follow up what actually will happen. Apparently the match disciplinary committee, or commissioner rather, can't sort of take action on the basis that the incident didn't happen during the game, but that's when it comes into outside of a code of conduct situation. So SANZAAR are still awaiting a report from Mendoza, and then they'll follow up from there.
Let's move on to the football ferns, their final game before the World Cup and a chance to instil some much-needed self-confidence.
Yeah, they've got Vietnam and Napier tonight. That match is about to kick off. New Zealand are currently on a 10-game winless run, something they'll be very keen to end and give themselves a much-needed boost ahead of their World Cup opener against Norway in Auckland on Thursday week. Now, New Zealand are ranked 26th in the world, Vietnam 32nd, but these rankings possibly flattered New Zealand. As you may remember, they were recently beaten 3-0 by Nigeria, who are ranked at 40th. And I feel this match tonight against Vietnam will also give us a clue as to whether New Zealand may have any chance of even registering a win in pool play and advancing to the knockout round of the World Cup. They've got the Philippines, they've got Switzerland, and they've got Norway in that opener. So those are the teams that they've got to come up against. The Philippines, who are ranked at 46, sort of the lowest ranked of that group. Switzerland at 20. So, the Philippines would certainly shape as the football ferns' only but hopefully only a chance to get that win in pool play, and maybe then have to upset the Swiss if they've got any chance of going through to that elimination round.
Thank you, Stephen. Ka kite, that's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson there. Could you find an extra $1,600 a month in the household budget if you had to? Well, that is the sharp end of the cost of living crisis for some Aucklanders, and that's on mortgage payments alone. Westpac has crunched the numbers for the so-called Great Refixing, and here is the reality check. You bought an average price Auckland home in May 2021 with a 20% deposit. Now you're coming off a fixed home loan. Your new mortgage interest rate is now on average more than 2 times what you've been paying, or close to an extra $1,600 a month in home loan repayments. And thousands more homeowners are about to reluctantly join the Great Refixing Club. And joining us now is Westpac senior economist Santesh Ranchod. Hi there. That was the situation for Auckland. What is it like around the rest of the country?
In the rest of the country, we are still looking at some pretty big pressures. House prices do tend to be lower, but even then, that scenario you just gave, homeowners would be looking at around $900 a month more on their mortgage payments. So that is a pretty big bite out of most households' disposable incomes.
How much are you estimating that people are spending on debt servicing?
Right now, if you've got a mortgage, you're probably spending around 15 to 16% of your mortgage, of your income on mortgage payments, but that could go up to over 20% over the next year.
And in terms of the number of people who are going to roll off fixed mortgages, what are those numbers?
I mean, we are looking at a decent chunk of people who are going to be refixing. About 50% of all mortgage holders are going to come up for repricing over the next 12 months. So that is going to be a pretty large share of the population.
And what kind of interest rates would have they been stress tested at? And are you seeing more mortgage arrears?
Well, normally when you apply for a mortgage, you wouldn't have been tested at those very low rates that were on offer through the pandemic. Chances are you would have been tested at rates that are closer to where we're at now, in that 5 to 6% range, although different lenders all have different requirements. In terms of those arrears, we have seen them starting to creep up, but they're still at pretty low levels. The economy's in good shape. The labour market especially is still pretty tight. That means people have still got some buffers that are helping insulate them from that pain that's coming through from mortgages as well as other living costs.
So what's going on with their discretionary spending then?
Discretionary spending has actually held up fairly well so far in the back of those strong gains in household incomes, but I think the pressure really is going to come on over the next 12 months. You've already got a cost of living crisis, add on some mortgage pressure, it could be tough times for a lot of families.
So household spending, I think, from your figures was around 9%, was it?
It's up by about that sort of percentage over the past year or so, yeah.
Okay. So are they getting more for their money, or is the spend up simply because stuff is costing more?
I think that latter point is exactly what the story is. For a lot of households, they're having to spend a lot more, but they're getting less bang for their buck, especially for those families who are on lower incomes. They're spending more on those necessities like food and utilities, and that's where we've seen especially large cost increases.
And so what are you forecasting in terms of people tightening their belt and the flow-on effects to the economy?
So for the average household, as they deal with those cost pressures, we think they are going to wind back their spending over the coming year. If you think about the actual amount of goods that you're taking home on a weekly basis, it's probably going to fall by about 2% over the next few years. That's a pretty big contraction because that's about 60% of the economy that's accounted for by household spending. I think that'll be an important drag on economic activity over the next couple of years.
So worst case scenario from that 2% is what? What do you think the picture will look like?
I think we're probably going to see an economy that is going sideways over the next couple of years. We are seeing a lot more people come into the country. It's a slowdown from a very strong point. The labour market, as I mentioned, is still in good shape, but it's definitely going to be a softer period of activity over the next couple of years.
And before you go, just whip out the crystal ball for a second and tell us what you reckon's going to happen with the OCR.
We're forecasting that the OCR is going to remain on hold this week at 5.5%. But I'm pretty cautious about what's going to happen going forward. We've seen overseas inflation's taking a long time to dissipate. I think there's a risk that the Reserve Bank might have to do a bit more down the line. But at least this week, that hold decision's looking pretty much in the bag.
But even if it is a hold, right, that's still holding at a high rate and people will be hanging out for some relief, won't they?
I think on the interest rate front, those rates are going to remain high for some time, but where we are seeing a bit of relief is that inflation is starting to edge back. It's still at high levels, but the trend there is on the way down, and I think we'll probably see a further easing in inflation over the rest of this year.
Good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. That is Westpac senior economist Satish Ranchod there. It is 26 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa i nāianei called Giles Beckford. Hi Giles. Let's talk about Infratil spending big again, and this time it's on a Hong Kong internet network company. Tell us more.
Indeed, it's buying an 80% stake in a firm called Console Connect. Now, Console Connect basically provides you with a platform where if you've got a big parcel of data in New Zealand and you need to take it to your office in Hong Kong or Singapore or into Europe, they'll provide the means of doing it all in one neat package with hopefully a price to match and some degree of security and discretion. And from that point of view, it's the growth area of the IT world, the digital world at the moment. Now, the other 20% is going to be retained by the current owners, which is Hong Kong Telecom. Now, Console Connect says we've got 700,000 kilometres of internet connections, whether it be cables or digital fibre or satellite or whatever. So they say we handle 17% of the world's internet traffic. From that point of view, it looks a pretty savvy investment. It's going to cost Infratil about $260 million, but it goes hand in hand with their other IT investments, which it's been quietly amassing over the past few years. Now, of course, they just bought out the other half of One New Zealand, formerly Vodafone. They own very profitable and well-regarded and large data centres based out of Australia, but expanding into New Zealand. They're involved in various other digital businesses. So they're thinking, if we put them all together, we're starting to amass some real core here, some real capability, which all knits together one way or another. There'll be some efficiencies out of it. It's a growth area. There are good earnings for it. Now, it won't pay its way for, I should say into the bargain, that Hong Kong Telecom and Infratil will pump another $400 million into Console Connect so that it expands its capacity. Undersea cables are involved in that as well. And there's a hint of politics about that one because, as you would imagine, being a Hong Kong-based company, undersea cables, Chinese involvement, possibility, that will unnerve some people. It's something that Infratil will have to just navigate its way through in the future. But for the time being, it looks to be, once again, one of those sort of canny investments that the company is becoming well known for.
And 2 Degrees is about to pull the plug on its old 3G mobile network. What does that actually mean, Giles?
Well, if you remember This coming around the mid-2000s, 2009, 2 Degrees set up the 3G network. 3G was slow, right? It was the sort of like the flip phone era. It was very simple, things like that. But you weren't surfing the web on 3G phones. You had limited texting and data retrieval and that sort of thing. A few years ago, of course, we went to 4G, and that's where we've got the revolution now where, we just take it for granted that, you flip open your phone or you turn it on, you can go anywhere. 5G is even quicker and takes you more places more quickly, but that's still in its building stages. 3G is a bit like the 1990 Toyota Corolla. Its days are done. It's done well, but it's no longer needed, superseded. So 2 Degrees finally joined Spark and One New Zealand, or One NZ, in pulling the plug on it. A couple of years yet before it actually does it, because even though they are basically fourth generation mobile data, there's some parts of the 2 Degrees network still running on the old third generation. So they've got to up the ante in some of those areas there. It will mean for some businesses and users that they'll have to update their handsets. That they'll no longer be just punching them in. They'll actually have to get the latest gizmos in order to ride it. The bottom line of it is that not only is it old-fashioned and out of date, but they want the spectrum, the radio spectrum that's used up to supply third-generation services. They want it for the ultra-fast fifth generation, which is being rolled out. So they're actually going to pull the plug on one to beef up another. But it's a couple of years away yet, but those affected will be contacted.
Can't wait for all the 1990 Toyota Corolla owners to be in touch. Thanks for that, Giles. Before you go, please, could you let us know the market numbers?
You got me into trouble with the cheer germs. You got me into trouble with the cheer germs, didn't you? Never mind. Top 50 index, local share market, didn't have the greatest start to the week, down 67 points, about 0.5%, 11,887. The New Zealand dollar, it's eased back against the US because of weak Chinese economic numbers that have come out. The Aussie and New Zealand dollars tend to rise and fall roughly as the news is good or bad out of China, because it's our big trading partner. So we're down at 61.8 US cents, hanging steady at 92.7 Australian.
Giles, have you got a flip phone just before you go, please?
No, I don't. I used to have one. But then I looked through my drawers. I've got a cheap third generation bought at a knockoff shop in Florence. I've got a flip one. I've got an old BlackBerry. And now I've got, everywhere I seem to go and get a work phone, after about 2 years I say, oh no, it's dead, it's been superseded. Hang on to it. So I've got about 17 music libraries now, which are all old phones.
To Papa will be calling you shortly. Thank you so much, Giles. That is Giles Beckford live from Wellington with our business news. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about the interview with David Seymour, the leader of the ACT Party. They want 17-year-olds to go back to being dealt with by the adult court, reversing legislation that was championed by the National Party and supported by ACT. This person says if 17-year-olds are old enough to bear the full consequences of New Zealand law, they are also old enough to have a say on who their lawmakers are. It is hypocritical of ACT to want to treat them like adults in the criminal justice system but deny them their adult right to vote. Another says this focus on the victim instead of the offender is dog whistling. Children committing offences like these are victims. Intervene before they get to that point. Another says putting them in jail will make a difference. It will make them more likely to offend. Once in jail, it is easier to go back. In support of David Seymour, this person says, I agree with David Seymour. Sadly, kids who do crime need to be held accountable and responsible and understand the consequences first hand. Another agrees, David is correct, people need to be responsible for their actions, and it is so refreshing to see a party politician admitting they got it wrong and will fix that. The reduction in court appearances is because they get diverted, warned and restorative justice, etc., instead of being held to account in court, says Stephen. It is 17 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We would love your feedback. Evie's giving me some silent feedback on my ability to tell the time. Homai o whakaaro, do get in touch. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. In my defence, the clock requires you to count backwards. Anyway, here's Evie with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
The Public Transport Union says Auckland commuters can expect another 3 days of peak hour bus strikes this week after mediation today failed. The union's president, Gary Froggatt, told Checkpoint that the offer of $28 an hour was $2 short of drivers' rates in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. A review says the government should make it clear that dawn raids to arrest overstayers should be a last resort only. It concludes that such arrests make the national apology from the government 2 years ago for the infamous dawn raids of the 1970s appear to ring hollow. The hearing for the 6 defendants in the Whakaari White Island trial started at the Auckland District Court this afternoon. WorkSafe brought the charges over the deaths of 22 people who died 4 years ago when the volcano erupted. And monsoon rains have hit large parts of South Asia, killing at least 20 people. India's capital, New Delhi, is witnessing severe flooding, bringing the city to a standstill. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, the roads in the main centres all appear to be working as they should. Nothing to report at the moment. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has sat down with our foreign minister days after saying Japan's plan to dump radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean is safe. The report from the UN nuclear watchdog found the release of the radioactive wastewater from the Fukushima plant conforms with international standards. RNZ Pacific's Lydia Lewis has spoken with the agency's Director General, Raphael Grossi, and joins us now. Hi, Lydia. What is Mr. Grossi doing here in New Zealand?
Well, what he's doing is essentially presenting a report, but what I asked him is, there's been so much frustration across the Pacific. Are you also here to, address those frustrations? And he said he did speak with the minister about those frustrations, and on top of speaking with New Zealand government officials, he is also heading to the Pacific to address these big concerns as well.
Okay, so if it is deemed safe to release this wastewater and the UN's nuclear agency says it's okay, why are people so up in arms?
So it's not just the general public or nuclear activists who are up in arms. It's experts as well, people who have studied nuclear physics for decades. And what they're up in arms about are a whole raft of things. Oh my goodness, I've been speaking to experts left, right and centre. Some are frustrated at the transparency of Japan, and they've said to me, how can we trust Japan if they're not giving us this data that we need to assess if it's safe or not? Others are saying that because we think that there's another option, we don't need to dump this or release this water into the Pacific Ocean. There's such a legacy here of nuclear harm to Pacific nations. We've got another option, which is turning it into concrete. Why can't we treat it, turn it into concrete? Then we don't have to have it in the ocean. But I did put that question today to Mr. Grossi, and he said, that is not that would not then be up to the standards of Japan. So while it would meet IAEA standards in Japan's legal framework, it would mean that the concrete is actually now deemed nuclear waste. So you could understand here there are so many facets. You've got experts all around the world, including the Pacific and New Zealand, with differing opinions. And, now the IAEA is essentially travelling the world, going to places that are most frustrated. Before this, he went to South Korea, and there were protests. He was met with masses of people who were extremely angry about this, because for them, it's going into their ocean, their part of the ocean first. So again, just many countries with differing views, and now he's got the job of explaining himself.
Okay, so what is New Zealand's official position then?
Well, I was hoping to have an official position for you tonight. I have just spoken with Nanaia Mahuta on the phone, and she didn't give me one. I asked her, does New Zealand support the release or dump, different words to describe it, and she dilly-dallied around the answer. She said, we'll wait and see what comes of this meeting with the Pacific, because of course she emphasised that New Zealand is part of the Pacific, so we stand with the Pacific. I then went on to question her and say, well, if you stand with the Pacific, do you agree with the Pacific Islands Forum panel of experts who are against this? Some of them are staunchly against this. And again, she didn't have an answer. She kept repeating that we stand with the Pacific, we are part of the Pacific, and I guess science is evolving was another message that she kept on putting out there. So maybe she needed an interview with you, Lisa, because I certainly couldn't get it out of her where we stand, where New Zealand stands on this.
I'm sure you will bring us more updates. Thank you for that, Lydia. That is RNZ Pacific's Lydia Lewis. It is 12 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. There's an environmental revolution brewing on the golf course, and it's all about your coffee discards. Waste coffee grounds collected from New Zealand cafes will be used to make biodegradable golf teas for local and international market. Research shows 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed globally every day, producing 18 million tonnes of coffee grounds as a byproduct annually. Kiwi company Volley Golf is behind the revolutionary coffee tea, and co-founder Kale De Herrera joins us now. Kia ora, Kale.
Hi Lisa, how's it going?
Very well. Explain to us how this works. How do coffee grounds turn into a golf tea?
Yeah, sure. So I think just the quick context here is, we started a golf company about 4.5 years ago, and we were trying to, investigate and understand, how golf products are made and essentially think about how we can do things differently and more sustainably. We launched New Zealand's first premium golf ball back about 6 months ago, and obviously the tea is a natural complementary product to that, and it led us on a bit of a deep dive into the tea industry and understanding that plastic is still heavily used in golf teas at the moment, and obviously there's a natural plastic problem with leaving plastic teas scattered around the golf course, and also there's issues with wood and bamboo. So most of the wooden teas come out of China and end up using a whole lot of wood that gets whittled down to make the wooden tea. So, we started looking at what other substances can we use to make teas, and we looked at a few pathways. One of them was looking at used sawdust. We had a bit of a struggle there with durability. So to make a, truly sustainable tea, it needs to be durable, right? Like it can't break on every shot. So it led us into a few different pathways on substances, and we actually discovered coffee being used in a lot of furniture and other bits and pieces, like as a replica for wood. So we decided to explore used coffee, and
so
effectively
sorry to interrupt you, but how much of the tea is actually made up of coffee grounds?
So coffee grounds are around 60 to 70%, and to increase the durability, which I said is a very important part of golf teas, we add some other biomaterials. Sugar cane is one, calcium carbonate, and we've got essentially a biomaterial substance added that is also obviously natural and biodegradable too, to increase the durability.
How long do they last for, your teas, compared to, say, a standard normal tea?
So it's an interesting question because it's all dependent on the golfer. So some golfers, depending on their swing path, can break a tee every shot. Our testing on average.
So let's assume you're not a hacker, Kale. Let's assume that. And all things being equal, what do you reckon?
So on average, we say that a golf will break a wooden tee about 3 to 4 shots. And ours will last about 6 to 7 shots. So we say there's about a 66% increase in durability relative to a wooden tee.
Okay, and what do you think the market is for these?
So our market effectively is, our goal is to be in every single golf shop around the country, and then obviously look for international markets. And we want to be the replacement to all other teas. Like we're calling this the most environmental and sustainable tea on the planet, and we think there's no other reason to be using a plastic or a wooden tea again.
So in production, just so that we can get a really true perspective on how environmentally friendly, because there's a lot of things that go into production, like often water, there's transportation and all the rest of it. So your tea, made from coffee, ironically, compared to a normal tea, given we're on one side of the world and all the rest of it? Do all the environmental equations add up?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two parts to this, and this is the pathway that we're trying to get to. So right now we're partnering with a Danish company, and we've got a IP sharing arrangement to bring manufacturing locally, and that's the pathway we're exploring at the moment. We're talking to cafes and other coffee producers around local manufacturing, because I think the key point is right now all our teas are imported, and as I said, the majority come out of China. So there's a big transportation cost of teas, and that's obviously what we're trying to cut out. And then I think two, there's a plastic alternative. So we're obviously trying to remove plastic from the golf course.
One very quick thing before you go. Does it smell good like coffee?
It smells like coffee, yes. We've designed a beautiful package that looks like a coffee bag, and you open it up and you can smell like morning coffee.
Oh, a reason to take up golf. Thank you so much for your time. That is Volley Golf's co-founder there, Kale de Herrera, who is, they're making teas, golf teas, out of coffee grounds. Only 10 sleeps till the FIFA Women's World Cup kicks off. New Zealand's migrant communities are getting together to welcome their teams and cheer for their home countries. This morning, players from Zambia and the Philippines landed at Auckland Airport, welcomed by dozens of supporters, with the arrivals area turning into one big party. After more than 25 years of trying to reach the global finals, this will be the first time the Philippines has a chance to compete at the World Cup. As for Zambia, the team's arrival was overshadowed by a report accusing the coach of sexual misconduct. Haisa Almeida has more.
The Auckland Airport arrival gate became a stage for dozens of very excited Zambia supporters. Between drums and chants, Auckland-based Tina Bonsumaru took time off work to welcome her team.
I think it's the first time ever we're having FIFA come to New Zealand, so this is huge. We can't wait to dance and the drums and just enjoy the whole atmosphere.
Are we gonna win?
We are. We already won. Okay, everyone pack it up. Africa is here. Game over.
She says football makes her people smile.
We like to dance. We love music. Our people, it's more than like football. It brings our people together, but it's like literally in our DNA.
Originally from Zimbabwe, Rosemary Bennett says she will be supporting all the African teams.
Even if they don't win, they're already champions by coming here. I'm from Zimbabwe, but I support South Africa, Zambia, any country I support, as long as you're from Africa.
African Communities President Evelyn Park says the event is an important opportunity to bring communities together.
It's not just the Zambians, it's other African community members that have come to support. So we're just taking this as a continental approach, supporting all of the girls that have qualified: Nigeria, Morocco, South Africa, Zambia.
The team's arrival comes just 2 days after The Guardian reported allegations of sexual misconduct against head coach Bruce Mwape. The Football Association of Zambia told the newspaper that he had referred the allegations to FIFA. Mr. Mwape was in Germany over the weekend for a warm-up game ahead of his team's trip down under, but RNZ didn't see him at the airport today. The rest of the Zambia squad are expected to arrive in the country tomorrow. As the Zambia team headed to their bus surrounded by drums and flags, a new crowd started to gather at the FIFA fan base. After more than 25 years of trying to reach the global finals, the Philippines will have its first chance to compete at a World Cup. Rene Molina is part of the committee of Filipino fans. He says no matter the results, the country is already proud of their girls.
If they win, that would be good, but being in the World Cup is already, they're already champions.
Also part of the committee, Carlos says the community will make its presence felt at all their games.
Here in Auckland, we've got groups that are buying tickets in groups of 10. In Wellington, we have a leader there that's bought 40 tickets. At least there will be a sizable number that people can see. Yeah.
Are we going to win?
We will. That's a very positive we will.
The Philippines will face Switzerland, New Zealand and 1995 champions Norway in Group A. While the team might not be the favourite to hold the cup, if the supporters are anything to go by, the Philippines are in with a shot.
I have a very good feeling that Filipino will do well on this FIFA soccer. Hey!
I am very excited. I'm usually a rugby fanatic, but that's soccer, but I'm here for the Philippines.
It's killing me waiting here to see them win! Win, win, win! Malupit na Filipino!
And Checkpoint has sought comment from tournament organisers and the Football Association of Zambia regarding the allegations against Zambia coach Bruce Mwape, but we are yet to receive any response. Let's get some of your feedback before 6, a whole bunch of it coming in about our interview with David Seymour and whether 17-year-olds should be dealt with in the youth court or the adult justice system. And you're split. And very much at opposite ends of the spectrum here. This person says, I totally support ACT in this proposal. I am absolutely not an ACT supporter in most matters and won't be voting for them. But in this, I believe they are right. Thanks, says Brendan. Another says, agree 110% with Seymour. Every 50-year-old I know is thinking of jumping the ditch if there is no change. Adult crime, adult time. Simple, says somebody else. But others are saying Seymour is talking nonsense. He is pandering to the ones who want revenge and not justice. Harsher penalties don't work. All it does is clog up the prisons and make more criminals. Solving poverty and family dysfunction will do way more than using the whip. Kathy says put a 17-year-old in an adult prison system and they exit having received their tertiary qualification and how to be a professional criminal. Change of direction on Giles Beckford and his chitter-chatter about Corollas. Toyota Corollas of the 90s are not done, this listener says. Giles is done. He has no idea what he is talking about.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The Immigration Minister has apologised to the Pasifika community, saying updated guidance on dawn raids should have been introduced. The government is being urged to consider changing the law to ban or restrict the use of dawn raids against overstayers. It was prompted by the early morning arrest of a Pasifika man at his South Auckland home earlier this year. The arrest came in spite of a national apology from the government for the infamous dawn raids of the 1970s. Andrew Little says updated guidance wasn't introduced following that apology.
Different guidance or updated guidance wasn't given following the dawn raid apology. That is a matter of record and I can't explain that.
It seems unlikely the government will introduce an outright ban of the practice. Andrew Little says he expects there will be rare cases when that approach is needed. Talks to avoid further strike action by Auckland bus drivers have failed. Up to 700 trips were disrupted earlier today, affecting thousands of commuters, and the industrial action will now continue for the next 3 mornings. Drivers are asking for the same rate of $30 an hour as drivers in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. The Tramways and Public Transport Union went into mediation with NZ Bus today. Union President Gary Froggatt told Checkpoint it didn't go well.
NZ Bus said that they're not prepared to negotiate any further, so we adjourned the mediation. We were promised $30 and it hasn't arrived, and so the drivers are wondering where the hell it is.
Gary Froggatt says school buses won't be affected by strike action if an agreement can't be reached by the end of the school holidays. Charges laid by WorkSafe into the Whakaari White Island eruption will be heard from tomorrow after proceedings opened in Auckland today. 6 defendants face health and safety charges brought by WorkSafe relating to the explosion that claimed 22 lives. The defendants include the island's owners. A karakia was held in the district court this afternoon with survivors and family members present. Judge Evangelist Thomas asked people to be patient with the court process. The trial proper begins tomorrow and is expected to last 4 months. On Friday, 3 helicopter tour operators pleaded guilty to the health and safety charges and will be sentenced next month. Households are expected to spend more money on debt servicing costs as many borrowers roll onto higher mortgage rates. The Reserve Bank has been raising the cost of borrowing money, or the official cash rate, to try to cool consumer spending and ease inflation. Westpac senior economist Satish Ranchod says debt servicing costs will increase for many. He says borrowers who purchased an average-priced home with an 80% mortgage 2 years ago may now have to pay another $900 in monthly mortgage payments. In Auckland, that rise could be closer to $1,600 a month. The government is rejecting Nationals' claim that Minister Peeni Henare failed to declare a conflict of interest. Nationals' Simeon Brown says a company run by Mr Henare's partner has received government contracts worth almost $600,000 in the past 2 years. Mr Brown says there is a clear conflict as some of the contracts were awarded to the Ministry of Health and Mr Henare is the Associate Minister of Health. He says Mr Henare hasn't declared that conflict in the public register, but a government spokesperson says that is untrue, as Mr Henare has disclosed his partner and her business interests to the Cabinet Office. The spokesperson says the minister had no involvement in awarding the contracts. The US President is set to meet with UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the next few months ahead of a major NATO summit in Lithuania. Joe Biden will also speak with King Charles during his brief visit. Here's the BBC's Frank Gardner.
Back in Britain for his 5th visit as president for what's been called a mini-state visit. President Biden will be seeing King Charles at Windsor Castle. The two men share similar views on climate change and the environment. But the US president declined to attend the King's coronation this year, sending the First Lady instead, seen by some as a snub. Then it's a meeting with Rishi Sunak before jetting off to the NATO summit in Vilnius. And all eyes will be on him in the Lithuanian capital as NATO decides whether to admit Ukraine as a future member.
Back home, the building regulator is looking at ways to improve the building consent process as the sector scrambles to investigate more than 1,000 consents. Authorities are looking into how an engineering technologist signed off on designs allegedly using the credentials of chartered professional engineers. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says it's acting as a coordinator for the 42 councils caught up in the problem. The ministry says it's aware of quality, consistency and reliability issues with certain statements that have been signed off. Engineering New Zealand expects the number of buildings related to the technologist to rise. Monsoon rains have hit large parts of South Asia, killing at least 20 people. India's capital, New Delhi, is witnessing severe flooding, bringing the city to a standstill. The higher-than-average rainfalls this year could also hit India's economy. Ishan Garg reports from New Delhi.
One of the biggest sectors of the Indian economy that's likely to be hit adversely by the monsoon is agriculture. It contributes to nearly 20% of India's GDP and it's almost entirely dependent on monsoon. So lack of rains or too much of rains can adversely impact agriculture. According to a new poll that was released by Access My India, nearly 55% of the farmers in the country said that they were worried about the monsoon season this year because a lot of the crops have suffered due to this excessive rainfall. North India itself has received nearly 47% more rainfall than what's average. So it could have a ripple effect across the Indian economy, which is very heavily reliant on agriculture.
And a plan to install a floating barrier on the Rio Grande River to deter migrant crossings from Mexico is being described as shameful by a Texas lawmaker. It's being put forward by the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. Dozens of the large spherical buoys have been unloaded near the river, and the barrier is expected to be completed over the next 2 weeks. Congresswoman Veronica Escobar told CNN that the decision is reckless and dangerous.
It is shameful. We are going to see more drownings. We know that deterrence and tactics like this don't stop desperate people who are running for their safety. It only causes more death.
Mr Abbott's other efforts to secure the US border with Mexico have included busing migrants to liberal states and authorising the National Guard to make arrests. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, Australia's former Chief Scientist Alan Finkel says an expansion of mining is critical to a green energy future. Controversy over US plans to send cluster munitions to Ukraine. Founders of one of the country's first taco food trucks, cooks Sarah and Otis Frizzell, on sharing their love of tacos and a celebration of the Ford Cortina, driven and loved by so many Kiwi families. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. In the west, from Northland to Kapiti, also Coromandel Peninsula, Taihape and Taumadunui. Showers, especially north of Taranaki, possibly heavy. Thunderstorms possible today in Northland. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, clearing tonight. Otherwise, mainly fine with isolated showers tomorrow. Wellington and Waded Upper, cloudy. Scattered rain clearing from Wellington tomorrow morning and from Waded Upper tomorrow evening. Fine weather for Nelson. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also for Dakiura, Stewart Island, mostly cloudy with scattered showers today. Tomorrow, rain developing in Fiordland from the late afternoon with possible thunderstorms. Rain spreading to southwestland in the evening. Marlborough, Canterbury, Southland and Otago, occasional drizzle about Banks Peninsula, otherwise fine spells. Tomorrow evening, scattered rain for Otago and Southland. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with showers. The time is 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The BBC has called in police and suspended a male presenter following allegations he paid a teenager for sexually explicit photos. The accusations about the unnamed presenter were first published by a UK tabloid newspaper, The Sun. It says the presenter paid the teenager £35,000. Here's World Watch's Charlie Drever.
It's a scandal that's gone to the heart of a British institution. A high-profile presenter accused of soliciting graphic images from a teenager. The mother of the young person involved told The Sun the presenter had been paying for images over a 3-year period, starting when her child was 17 years old. The mother says her now 20-year-old used the money to fund a crack cocaine habit. The BBC's Charlotte Gallagher says The Sun's latest front-page story contains even more allegations.
They're saying that this unnamed presenter made a panicked phone call to the young person involved, saying, "What have you done?" and tried to get this young person to tell their mum to stop this investigation. The family of this young person have also told the Sun newspaper they're very upset with the BBC's statement today, saying that the BBC at no point after they made this initial complaint in May contacted them for a proper interview.
The BBC says it became aware of a complaint in May, and an investigations team has been looking into it since. However, the corporation says new allegations of a different nature came to light late last week, and it is now investigating all of the claims. The age of sexual consent in the UK is 16, but when indecent images are involved, a person is still considered a minor until the age of 18, making this a police matter. The presenter in question remains unnamed due to legal reasons, but as Charlotte Gallagher explains, this has led to public speculation on who the accused could be.
People nothing to do with this story have been forced to come out on social media and defend themselves, other male presenters at the BBC, because they've been falsely accused of being behind these. So you've had Rylan, for example, Gary Lineker, Nicky Campbell, Jeremy Vine, huge names being essentially defamed, libelled on social media, and they've come out and they've said it's not them.
The BBC is also facing mounting pressure from both sides of the political spectrum. UK Government Minister Victoria Atkins urged the BBC to act quickly.
These are very, very serious allegations, and the BBC needs to act swiftly. It needs to follow its procedures that it says it has in place. But I'm a former Minister for Safeguarding, and I worked for 20 years in the criminal justice system. And so in all of this and in our conversations about it, we have to remember that there is a person, a young person at the centre of this.
Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves told Sky News this matter goes beyond the BBC.
The BBC, but also other broadcasters, do need to get a grip, because we seem to lurch from one scandal to another and more needs to be done.
The Metropolitan Police says it will need additional information before determining what action should follow. The BBC says it expects to provide further information in the coming days.
A leading US politician is calling on health authorities there to investigate the popular energy drink Prime, which he says is a cauldron of caffeine. The drink was started by YouTube influencers, including Logan Paul. The energy drink is banned in New Zealand because it exceeds the acceptable caffeine limits. Prime contains more caffeine than a six-pack of Coke and is hugely popular with young people. US Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says the US Food and Drug Administration needs to investigate it.
What is specifically targeted at kids but has more caffeine than a cup of coffee, more caffeine than a can of Coke, more caffeine than even a Red Bull? And what has more caffeine? This new summer sensation drink aimed at kids called Prime. This is an eye-popping level of caffeine for a young kid's body. And because the product is billed as a hydration and sports drink in its other near identical form, kids are likely to ingest cans of this stuff with the parents being unaware.
New Zealand Food Safety Acting Deputy Director General Jenny Bishop says a business can be fined up to $100,000 and an individual up to $20,000 for selling the illegal drink. She says they're concerned about the high levels of caffeine in the product for any consumer, but especially for children as they are more susceptible to the effects of caffeine. She says they became aware that Prime energy drink was being sold via online channels and a few small retailers last month and began an investigation. 4 web-based sellers have since removed the products from sale. It is 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The United States is defending its decision to supply Ukraine with cluster munitions amid criticism from some of its allies and from within the president's own party. More than 100 countries have banned the use of the weapons because of the risk they pose to civilians. Here's the ABC's Jade McMillan from Washington.
They've been described as a potential game changer, but the US president's move to send cluster munitions to Ukraine has drawn sharp criticism from Democrats in Congress, such as California Representative Barbara Lee. She spoke to CNN.
What I think is that we would risk losing our moral leadership, because when you look at the fact that over 120 countries have signed the Convention on cluster munitions, saying they should never be used, and in fact, many of us have urged the administration to sign on to this convention. And so I'm hoping that the administration would reconsider this, because these are very dangerous bombs, they're dangerous weapons, and this is a line that I don't believe we should cross.
Cluster munitions release large numbers of smaller bomblets that can kill indiscriminately over a wide area, and those that don't immediately detonate risk harming civilians years after a conflict has ended. More than 100 countries, including Australia, have banned their production, use or transfer. And in the days since the United States announcement, Canada, the United Kingdom, Spain and Germany have reiterated their opposition to the use of the weapons. While New Zealand's Prime Minister has been quoted as saying cluster munitions cause huge damage to innocent people, and that those views have been expressed to the US through diplomatic channels. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told American ABC cluster munitions are needed to keep Ukraine in the fight as it continues its counter-offensive against Russia.
They are using artillery at a very accelerated rate, many thousands of rounds per day. This is literally a gunfight. And so they're running out of inventory. We are trying to ramp up our production of the kind of artillery shells that they're using most. But that production rate is still not where we want it to be.
The US insists the cluster munitions being provided to Ukraine have a low so-called dud rate, minimising the risk caused by those that don't explode immediately. Kyiv's ambassador to the US, Oksana Markarova, says they'll only be used against Russian forces within Ukraine's borders.
There is nothing controversial about it. We are fighting on our territory, brutal enemy. There is nothing worse than tortures, rapes, and everything that Russians do on the territories they occupy, and we need to liberate as quick as possible.
Joe Biden has described the decision to send the weapons to Ukraine as very difficult to make, and it's one he's likely to face questions on at this week's NATO summit in Lithuania.
The leaders of some of the world's most powerful nations are preparing to gather for one of the most eagerly anticipated NATO summits in recent history. As well as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the summit will discuss plans for the expansion of its membership. The addition of Sweden will be on the agenda, and there's also the long-term question of whether Ukraine will eventually join NATO. The ABC's David Sparks has the story.
Even by NATO standards, this two-day summit starting in Lithuania on Tuesday will have monumental questions to grapple with. The alliance is still struggling to reach an agreement on admitting Sweden as its 32nd member. And casting a shadow over the entire agenda is NATO's effort to contain Russia. Professor Ben Wellings is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at Monash University.
I would think that NATO has an interest in seeing Russia diminished, perhaps defeated in a way that doesn't lead to some kind of radicalisation or escalation of the conflict.
Helping Ukraine fight back against the Russian invasion is a clear priority, but the best way to do it will be up for discussion.
There are calls, of course, coming from Ukraine and indeed within or from people close to the NATO establishment who have now retired that NATO needs to provide more materiel and munitions to Ukraine to help them actually prevail.
Whether Ukraine will eventually be admitted into NATO will be one of the talking points. Some argue that bringing Ukraine in as a member would deter Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. But others fear it would provoke Russia, leading to an even wider conflict. US President Joe Biden says Ukraine isn't ready to become a member. He says it still has more work to do in strengthening its own democracy. No one expects there to be much progress on that issue during this summit, but Ukraine-based analyst Michael Basik from the Atlantic Council says a final decision isn't crucial right now.
The Ukrainians will also tell you that, in a way, they already are de facto members. There's a lot of training going on. There's a lot of NATO standard weaponry being used here, a lot of interoperability, that sort of thing, a lot of coordination.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will be in the spotlight at the summit in Lithuania. He remains the biggest obstacle to Sweden's attempts to join NATO alongside Finland. President Erdogan argues Sweden is still too lenient on militant Kurdish groups that have been fighting for independence in Turkey. Meanwhile, even though Australia is not a member of NATO, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in Europe for discussions. He landed this morning in Germany for talks with Chancellor Olaf Scholz about climate change and to sign an agreement to supply the German army with over 100 Australian-made Boxer weapon carrier vehicles.
This will boost our sovereignty, this will increase our defence capability and boost our economy.
Also on Anthony Albanese's agenda will be a desire to have NATO expand its presence in the Indo-Pacific region.
Following the recent failed mutiny in Russia, Poland and the Baltic states have been warning about the increasing threat from their neighbour, Belarus. Fighters from the Wagner Group were supposed to move to Belarus and disband, but without confirmation that has happened, Poland has been reinforcing its border patrols in anticipation of their arrival. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford reports.
On Poland's eastern border, there are more patrols than ever. Talk of mercenaries from the Wagner Group moving to Belarus has made Poland extra vigilant. It's raising its guard. There's already miles of metal fencing here, installed after Belarus encouraged thousands of illegal migrants to cross 2 years ago. Now the government is warning Wagner forces could be used to spark more trouble.
I'm looking for that if there is no people near the fence from the other side and from our side, from Poland.
But all's quiet for now.
The
biggest threat is that our neighbour, Belarus, is completely unpredictable. Maybe Wagner will be a problem, but no one really knows why they're going there or what they're preparing for.
All of this, the giant fence, the wire, the lights, the cameras, they're all a huge physical sign of how much has changed in this region. The fact that Poland now sees Belarus as hostile and as a direct threat, not just to this country, but to the whole of NATO and of Europe. And now the Wagner Group has only added to that. It's 2 weeks since the mercenaries took over Rostov, and began marching on Moscow. The hasty deal that stopped them was meant to see Wagner fighters exiled to Belarus, only they've not actually been spotted there yet. In fact, right after the mutiny, we called Wagner centres across Russia, and they were still recruiting. So we decided to check the lines again. It's not working. Then I got a message from a Wagner contact online. Yes, we're recruiting. Everything's as normal, the voice says. He then sent instructions on how to join Wagner at their Russian training base. Belarusians think Wagner may never head there. Valery believes his country's authoritarian leader would be wary of armed men with a history of betrayal, and that Wagner's own leader would be wary of Belarus.
I think he'll end up somewhere where it's harder for the Russian FSB to find and poison him. In Belarus, the FSB don't even wipe their feet at the door. They just march in and do what they want.
So as the mystery of the Wagner mutineers continues, Poland's fears may well prove unfounded. For now, though, it's taking no chances.
Australians will soon be able to give themselves a lifetime ban from online gambling. A new national self-exclusion register begins in August. It allows people to block themselves from all 150 interactive gambling providers in the country. The Australian government is also introducing a new mandatory verification system which requires betting companies to check someone's identity for a new account before they can make a bet. The ABC's Nabil Al-Nashar reports.
It's a system dubbed BetStop, and it will allow gamblers to exclude themselves from online betting for anywhere from 3 months to a lifetime.
This is a game changer because it means that with one touch, an individual is able to exclude themselves from these forms of online gambling.
Communications Minister Michelle Rowland says it means you won't be able to place a bet online or on the phone. Gambling companies will also have to verify customers' identity when they register for a new account and before they place any bets, replacing the current requirement to do so only within 72 hours. To help with that, BetStop will rely on new software that can process 1 million requests per minute.
What it will mean is that we can ensure that people who are placing a bet, even before they place that bet, they actually have been verified, including for determining whether they're underage or whether they are self-excluded customers.
Gambling providers will also be banned from sending emails and texts to people who are on the register. Kai Cantwell is CEO of Responsible Wagering Australia, which represents betting companies.
This has been a couple of years in the making, and we've been very supportive with government on implementing the 10 measures of the National Consumer Protection Framework. Pre-verification has been something that Responsible Wagering Australia has been committed to for some time. So this will really bring the entire industry up to the standard that our members already operate on.
Gambling researcher Associate Professor Charles Livingston from Monash University describes BetStop as a solid step forward, but questions why it's taken so long.
I mean, there's been a system like this in place for years, and this is not highfalutin software. This is reasonably straightforward stuff. It exists around the world. It should have been implemented at least 5 years ago.
An Australian study has found that plastic recycling won't be enough to make a substantial difference to the carbon emissions produced by its manufacture and use. Here's the ABC's Stephanie Smale.
After manufacturing plastic products in Brisbane for 30 years, Royston Kent is now in the business of recycling too.
We take waste paint pails and we basically turn them into paint trays and other paint accessories.
He says it's an expensive process, but he's confident it's worth it.
It's not easy. The reason it's not being done is because it's dirty. No one really wants to do it, but people have got to do it. Virgin plastics aren't going away, but if we do have to use them, let's just make sure we've got the right collection method methods and bring them back in and reuse them again.
Virgin plastics are new plastics with no recycled elements, and they're one of the biggest hurdles to reducing emissions, according to a report by environmental consultants Blue Environment. It found that with plastic consumption continuing to rise, the emissions released from plastic use in Australia will more than double to over 40 million tonnes a year by 2050, even if all of the plastic is recycled. Shane Cacao is from the Australian Marine Conservation Society, which, along with WWF Australia, commissioned the report.
What this research shows us is that what governments have focused on historically, trying to get recycling rates up, is just not enough. As long as plastic use keeps escalating, and we're on track to see the amount of plastic that we use double by 2040, we need to see something that actually limits the amount of plastic that we're using.
So the only solution is just to not have it in the first place?
Unfortunately, yes. We need to be focusing on using plastic where it's essential and starting to get away from the frivolous and unnecessary use of plastic that's really become dominant today.
The report shows capping plastic production at current levels would reduce carbon emissions dramatically by 2050, with even better results if new production was cut by 10%. Australia's Environment Ministers agreed last month to develop new national packaging rules to minimise waste, increase recycled content and make business take more responsibility for recycling. Shane Cacao points out the detail is still murky though. He explains reducing plastic use overall is key because recycling can generate emissions too.
So we need to make sure that we're not just replacing one problem with another problem.
You can't take your frozen peas home in a paper bag or in your pocket. So we do need plastic for the foreseeable future, but we do need to reduce the amount that we're using.
Tanya Barden is the CEO of the Australian Food and Grocery Council. She says the council's already working with large manufacturers with a major focus on soft plastics and redesigning packaging to reduce plastic use.
We have to be very careful here that we don't create unintended consequences. And for food and cosmetics and things like that, they need to have a really high safety level.
In a statement, a spokesman for the Environment Department says recycling and reusing does reduce emissions by reducing landfill and decreasing the need for new non-recycled plastic. The spokesman also points out Australia is advocating for a legally binding global plastics treaty to reduce new plastic production.
All right, before we head off, a last bit of your feedback. This on the tripping of the pitch invader by Sam Cane. What a mean-spirited act. This guy is the skipper of the team. Speaks volumes about the arrogance of him. He should get a DCM. Not a great example to hold up for the kids, that person reckons. On the subject of teas, golf teas made out of coffee grounds, do they have different types and colours of teas like brown latte, espresso, black and flat white? Sounds delicious. Now, on First Up tomorrow morning, they'll have a full account of the football Ferns friendly against Vietnam. It's going to be a fantastic show. I'm sure Nathan Rarere will have a view on 1990 Toyota Corollas as well. Do tune in, 5 a.m.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. In reaction to a review on dawn raids, the Immigration Minister has apologised to the Pacifica community, saying updated guidance on such raids should have been introduced. Talks to avoid more strike action by Auckland bus drivers calling for pay equity have failed, and their industrial action will continue for the next 3 mornings. Health NZ is confident it'll keep the approval it needs to carry on training junior cancer doctors at Dunedin Hospital. And a Texas lawmaker has described as shameful a plan by the governor to install a floating barrier on the Rio Grande River to deter migrant crossings from Mexico. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan, Francis Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower who smuggled 22,000 documents out of the Silicon Valley headquarters that reveal that the social network knew from its own research that its platforms were damaging teenage mental health, amplifying hate and ethnic violence, as well as undermining democracy. Her new memoir lays out the small steps and perseverance over the course